Test 1, 2. Hey, 1, 2. Hey. Test. Test 1, 2. Hey, hey, 1, 2. Hey. Test 1, 2. Hey.
feel like you need to hit again. So. Up by the receivers, and then it's ready to go. If you want to kind of like mute it, you press the button, and then to turn it off, you just press and hold. Well, you know, okay, so they'll be on your seat.
Actually, thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. Can you please take your seats? Wow.
So we can see you
Oh, okay.
presenting and all of that, because I don't
Okay.
think anybody's using the screen.
Okay.
Where should we take our seats?
Well, it depends, Harold. You can throw it at me. You can go out and. No, I got one. I'm good. Good morning, everybody. Wow, what a weekend. I am overwhelmed and grateful. Your participation, your voice, I was thinking this morning, we've heard about the past, you've educated us, you've challenged us, and you've contributed to a conversation that we, at least at the center, intend to continue. Before I get into thanking so many people that made this happen, I need to not just do a small shout out, but a resounding scream and yell to the Center for It's been a long weekend. For the CCP, my CCP colleagues, every one of them worked so hard to make your experience a good one. And not only this weekend, but they've been working tirelessly for a year. So please acknowledge them now. And if you are a staff member, one of my colleagues, and you're in the room, will you please stand? I did this the first night, but we've got more people and different audiences, so I'm going to thank our exhibition lenders, Scott Baker, Marianne Hesseldens, Peter McGill, Robert Mann, Laurence Miller, Rick Wester. I also want to thank our sponsors for this event, Susan von Kersberg, Fernshad, J.W. Keek Heifer Foundation, Jet and Julie Anderson, Tim Haggard Long Realty, Christopher Herbert and Nancy Welch, the University of Arizona School of Art, Richard Menschel, Glenn Williamson, Peter McGill, and Susan Paulson McGill. Thank you. I also want to make a special mention to our Director Circle members. We only started this Leadership Giving Circle last year. I was hoping for 8, and we got 30 people. Their support makes programs like this possible, and I am deeply grateful for their support and belief in what we're doing here. I want to remind everybody about the handbook that we are right now in the midst of making, and we really need your participation. All the materials that you need are in the last gallery of the exhibition. I also want to remind you that there's a photo booth opportunity in the gallery at Harold's desk. It's really fun. You need to participate in that one. We also have the grease pens, which are out in front of the contact sheets that are on the temporary wall. Please, if you know the folks that are in those photographs, document them, tell us about them, or just go nuts and make it cool. And is that everything? Oh, and if you make one more stroll through the gallery, take time in the exhibition, pull those flat files out, see the work and handle it. There's just an incredible amount of content there, and we want to share it with you. We're going to begin this morning with a panel discussion. We're going to take it full circle. We started out this weekend with some firsthand knowledge from those that were responsible for LIGHT. And we're going to bring up those today who knew it firsthand, get their perspective on the weekend, what they've heard, and hear about their personal experience. Then we're going to take a short break and reconvene for a tribute to Harold, for Harold, about Harold, dancing with Harold. And that's going to be followed by a lunch reception in the lobby, including a toast. So, yeah. Let me introduce our panelists this morning. Susan Harder was hired as Associate Director of Light Gallery in 1973 by Harold Jones on the recommendation of Nancy and Beaumont Newhall, with whom she studied the history of photography. After several years at Light, Harder started her own photography and sculpture gallery in New York City. Currently, she is an environmentalist working with astronomers on the issue of light pollution with the International Dark Sky Association that happens to be headquartered in Tucson, Arizona. Again, working with light. Peter, maybe I just have to. Peter McGill is the president of Pace McGill Gallery, which he founded in 1983 with Arnie Glimcher of Pace and Dick Solomon of Pace Prints. One of the world's leading fine art photography galleries, Pace McGill has been dedicated to the advancing of the medium for over 30 years. In this time, McGill and his team have presented over 350 exhibitions and published numerous catalogs on modern and contemporary photography. The New York City Gallery is known for discovering artists such as Nan Goldin, Joel Peter Witkin, and Paul Graham, and representing masters such as Irving Penn, Richard Avedon, and Robert Frank, to name a few. McGill graduated with a BFA from Ohio Wesleyan University in 1974 and an MFA from the University of Arizona in 1977, where he was the first student to graduate from the MFA photography program. In 2019, he entered into a partnership with Radical Media to develop streaming content focused on the history of photography. Laurence Miller has over 40 years' experience in fine art photography market, not only as a gallerist and curator, but also as an active collector. Miller studied photography at the University of Wisconsin under Cavalier Ketchum, earning a BS and MA degree, and did further graduate work at the University of New Mexico under Thomas Barrow, Van Deren Koch, and Beaumont Newhall. Miller joined Light Gallery in 1974 and was associate director until 1980. In 1981, he started a private dealership in photography, and in 1984 opened Laurence Miller Gallery. Jack Salle is an artist from Waterbury, Connecticut. He lives and works in New York. He was represented by Light Gallery from 1983 to 1987 and was curator from 1984 to 1985. His works are part of international public collections, including the Museum of Modern Art, Ludwig Museum, Cologne, Museum Moderner Kunst, Vienna, Detroit Institute of Art, Yale University Art Gallery, the International Center for Photography, Museum für Kunst in Hamburg, Museum of Contemporary Photography, Chicago, the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam, the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, the Israel Museum, the Center for Creative Photography, and the Istituto Nacional per la Grafica, Rome. Wow. Rick Wester's career in photography is as diverse as one can have. In the 1980s, he worked at Light, the seminal New York Gallery of Contemporary Photography, and then as an independent dealer and advisor. From 1992 until 2001, he served at Christie's as the head of photographs and then international director overseeing auctions in New York, London, Los Angeles as the department's auctioneer. He left Christie's to become the director at Gagosian. Following this, Rick returned to private dealing and as interim director of the Howard Greenberg Gallery. In 2004, he was hired as consultant to Philip DePury Company. In January 2005, he joined the firm full-time as a partner and worldwide head of photography. In 2007, he launched Rick Wester Fine Art with a full exhibition and sales program. RWFA promotes a select group of emerging and mid-career photographic and other artists while offering collections, consulting, and appraisals. Wester is a certified member of the Appraisers Association of America and the Association of International Photography Art Dealers. I'm going to ask our panelists to come up for a quick chat first thing. And so please join me. We're going to do some rearranging here. Throw that away.
No, I have mine over here. I took yours.
Brian, all I have to do is say his name. Maybe I should do my shout out now. If anyone knows anybody who wants to put their name on a new auditorium here at the Center for Creative Photography, I am so willing to have that conversation. If you look at other auditoriums around campus, there are lots of models and state-of-the-art sound systems and heating and cooling systems that will just invite you to spend much more time with us. To this esteemed panel, tell me, why did all these people come to Tucson to talk about light?
Light is the source of life. Light is the source of life.
Well, there you go.
Did you rehearse that? I just remembered it barely.
I mean, from the point of view of community, why do you think we were so successful in drawing so many people here?
Well, I think in the dialogue of photography, and probably a much larger dialogue, that the center is esteemed. People love it, know it, want to learn from it, and then when you combine that with the fact that it's the examination and celebration of something as wonderful as light, it's a good draw.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think it feels good.
That's great.
You know, how could we not honor Harold and Fern and the Center for Creative Photography? It took me 12 hours to get here, and I would have walked. I mean, it's just such a pleasure to be here, and especially to see how much regard that beautiful, beautiful place, not just physically but emotionally. You know, it's a very emotional experience, and it's regenerated by being here and being with my colleagues. Thank you.
Yeah. I also think it's so appropriate that it's a symposium that's honoring light, not just a classic exhibition of light, because it continues the concept that Harold had and Tennyson agreed to, that light would be a catalyst for photography in every sense, not just the sale of prints, not just the view of photography as fine art, but that light would evolve into a magnet for photographers to disseminate ideas about what the medium could be and also support the work in its full range.
You know, there's so little. Is this on? I don't know how to use these things. I'm an analog guy. And don't get me started on the subject of community again.
Ooh, that was loud.
There's so little that is written or available about the experience of being in the photography market, the photography markets, I should say, you know, over the last 40 years, that it took something like this to coalesce information from a wide variety of sources. And you know, what you guys did, Annie and Becky and the whole staff, what you guys did was start to fill in a gap that there's such a demand for, because the market's big, It's what I used to say when I was in the auction business, and the photography market is much bigger than any one of us knows, even Peter. Maybe not.
Can you quantify that?
I'll sell you my list. So I think that that's what the draw was that there's a need, there's a desire, there's a void. And so you guys did what good art historians do, is to fill in the gaps.
I think just quickly, there are also a lot of sort of sporadic efforts to do just this. And it's pretty nice, I think, in light of celebrating Harold, Fern, Light in the center, that it all happens here.
Yeah.
Because, I think a lot of people in our field are trying to examine this period in our history and make it part of a larger dialogue than just about photography or its relevance to sort of contemporary culture. But that and to your point, it's happening here because this is the center and because it's a celebration.
Right, and I often tell folks when we do exhibitions or projects like this, maybe not at this level, there are things that only the center can do because we don't have to borrow, we don't have to travel. All we do is go upstairs and put time and effort into reading and searching. And that really is, it's why we're here. But this weekend has helped me remember that in a very particular way.
If I can add, I've been thinking a lot about this over the last few weeks, and I think a majority, maybe Harold would really clarify this, but an awful lot of the Light's goals have been achieved. And I think hearing your statements from the opening day about trying to prove, demonstrate, establish photography as an art gallery exhibited medium has completely happened. And I think a circle has been complete. And I think now the struggle is how can you maintain the uniqueness of photography? How can it grow while it is now a central part of the art dialogue? And there was Museum of Modern Art rehung their whole museum, and there was an interesting review in a Collector Daily newsletter about how photography's role is now shown at MoMA. And in a way, it's great that you can have Arbus, or maybe some of the folks in this room, have their pictures hanging beside Picasso and Matisse. But at the same time, what got lost in the reshuffle was that kind of historic trajectory that we would go to the museum to discover and what made a picture great and to see the best of something. So while we've gained, we've lost something. And a little analogy quickly is, in Kansas City a few years ago, I visited the Negro Baseball Hall of Fame or something, a name like that. And they talked about how black baseball players had to be in their own segregated league because until the mid-50s, blacks could not be in the major leagues. And once you had Jackie Robinson and a whole number of other top-level athletes starting to be in professional baseball, once that happened, it was the beginning of the end of the Negro League. They just didn't have the support, they didn't have the audience, they didn't have the stars. So I think photography as a little self-isolated destination is now eclipsed into a larger world, and I think we all, those of us who are still active in it, have to adjust to this new reality. And a number of us who, Peter and myself and others of our generation, it's becoming someone else's fight.
Well,
And while we preserve what we truly love and so much respect and appreciate what Harold and others initiated in the early days.
yeah. And the fight has evolved. It's a different fight than it used to be.
It is.
Now, it seems to me that light could happen when it did, because photography was in such an underdog position. That's been mentioned over the weekend. Can you tell me where this sense of commitment came from?
With the sense of what?
Commitment came from.
For myself, I just want to point out how brilliant Harold was with not just selecting artists, but the staff. We all came from, we're all well educated, we come from similar backgrounds, but we all had we brought different expertise to the gallery. A lot of people asked Harold for a job. I actually received it behind my back. Beaumont and Nancy Newhall, wrote to him and asked him to hire me because I had a museum background. I was one of the people who was not a photographer. And I was very uncomfortable talking to living artists. I had always dealt with dead artists. I majored in Renaissance art history. I was in Italy. But
It's a lot easier to do a show that way, too. Because you just have the curator,
and
staff.
I was part of that second wave, with Larry and Victor. And we witnessed Harold leaving, and we also witnessed the moving to 724 Fifth Avenue. So it was, and believe me, we were so incredibly naive. And I think that helps us because the art world, as we all know, is a very it's a very big industry, but it isolates. It doesn't bring in newcomers very easily. But we didn't know that. The things that we didn't know, I think, helped us. And I don't know if I've answered your question, but I just wanted to point out how the diversity of the staff and but we all shared a tremendous passion for photography, and he knew that. And we all shared a passion for the work that we were doing, and we were undaunted. We knew what we were doing was terribly special, was very important. We just wanted to try to find as many people as possible who could join the effort, and we did.
I think we all, too, grew up, and this is picking up on something Fern was talking about yesterday. We all grew up in a time when we learned about the world we lived in through photography. And the picture magazines played a big part in that. I think everybody in this room who's over a certain age knew what day Life Look in the Saturday Evening Post arrived in your mailbox, and we looked forward to it. With the death of those magazines, that we still had this global interest in looking at photographs, and somebody had to absorb it. So it put pressure, and good pressure, on galleries and museums to start answering that call. I think so. That was something I think that happened. We grew up, we believed in photography, we loved photography, and categorically we needed jobs. And the way I think most people are brought up is, you can do it, go for the best. So, Light was simply the best, so we aspired to working there, and it was the best because of what Harold aspired to, and it was really about representing and taking the best care we could. Listen, okay, of the artists. Wait a minute. As Becky said, I have the mic. It was Harold put together this ship, and it was a bunch of ragtag stuff that took on the most elegant of shapes and could cut through the water. It's you, Harold.
And you all ran around the country and met with museum directors, as you said yesterday. You were infusing photography into major institutions.
Yeah, I was the first person to do that. Harold said to me, put a bunch of photographs in a box and go see every museum in the country, regardless that they did not have a photography department, they didn't collect photographs, and it was like, huh? But I went there, I laid out the pictures. Now every one of those museums has a department of photography, collection of photography. That was your idea.
What have you all heard this weekend that resonated for you, that you may have found provocative, made an impression on you, or maybe even how you thought about light?
I'm going to get all choked up again.
It's okay. We've got tissues.
That it became this is completely overwhelming to me.
There really wasn't anything at all like Light after. There really wasn't. And, that makes it that much more important, that much more special. But before Light Gallery, there was 291, where photography was integrated with other art, was regarded as a major art form. And I think that that was something that we remembered, but I mean, it was, 40 years earlier. But, I don't know what happened in between, but the fact that light was necessary, but it was just necessary, and it fulfilled everyone's hopes and dreams. And the way that you would see people coming in off the elevator, not the one that looked at the photographs and left, but people were, yeah. But they were completely awestruck and appreciative, and just, I'm telling you, it was very emotional, working there
Jack?
and witnessing the experience of the people who were coming to appreciate what had transpired.
Jack?
Well, I think for me, the other aspect of light that made it different than other galleries was the parallel of Fern and Tennyson being, in the greatest sense of the word, patrons. That they would, as in the tradition of European cultural method, give free rein to these masters, in the case of Harold, in terms of putting a vision onto the gallery, and then all of us who followed in knowing that somehow photographers, the medium, and the artists associated would guide that endeavor to something more than just the selling of work.
Well, as art dealers, which is what we ended up accidentally being, we learned more about what to do with the photographs from the photographers themselves. I did reach out to some other art dealers, to figure out what they do in life, but the photographers taught us how to approach their work, and it was always different. Approach their work, present their work, educate the public about their work. They taught us what to do.
You bring up a point Peter and I were talking about yesterday that I think we've tried to draw a parallel to this weekend, and especially to this center. Can you talk about education and what role that played at Light? The community, the stories, the legacy. What do you think about that?
Yeah, a word I came up with this morning was that we were enablers. And maybe this is a way to fit that in. No, but hey, I'm not thinking Les Parnas, I'm thinking Lev Parnas. No, because Harold started this, and Fern and Tennyson, our job was to enable these men and women to achieve their goals as artists. And everything we did was for that purpose. And I think I did it blindly and faithfully and gave it my best. I didn't quite know what I was doing, but I knew I was doing their task. You're still doing it. And I feel that is exactly what I'm trying to do in my own way now.
Okay. Rick, what do you?
It's we've been discussing this for about a year, I guess. This symposium, the film, everything, and it's been incredible retrospective over the course of the last 12 months or so, in thinking about how light, or my experience of light, has shaped the rest of my career. And so to get back to your other question in terms of was there any one thing I learned new this weekend? There are tons of things that I've learned. It's shifted my perspective on my whole life, for the last year, to really understand, where in the scope of things my experience was in terms of the gallery and the gallery's role in the market and where we all went from there. I mean, it took me 10 years after Light to get into the auction business. But I would not have had the success that I had in the auction business if it wasn't for my experience of working at Light and working with Larry, working with Peter, and the generosity that Fern and Tennyson showed. I can't tell you how generous they were as gallery owners. I learned about the world.
Yeah, let's
Because of
remember that we were all highly educated by great teachers.
Speak for yourself.
I mean, I couldn't, well, I couldn't possibly have had better teachers initially with Tom Barrow and Beaumont Newhall and Van Daren Koch. So when you learn from these great teachers, you learn how to teach.
I just want to go back to the question before this one. Sort of looking at what's gone on here, I get very hopeful and think about the educational component, and that is yesterday morning when Salle and Marvin so elegantly sort of recounted their earliest moments at Light Gallery. And you know, it's very, very meaningful. I think everybody up here will all start crying if we think too much about this stuff. But it was real. It was palatable, and we, you know, thought we were doing God's work helping the artists. You know, it was that simple. But the next piece of the morning was Mcgill, a wonderful art historian, scholar, speaking from the experience of looking at records and looking at the archive. That is what art history is about. What we all experience by knowing all these people is not real. It's not typical. It was real to us. It's why we did what we did. And we are all different people because we got to know Harry Callahan and Tom Barrow and all the artists that we worked with there. That was an enriching experience, but we aren't going to be around forever to do this.
Exactly.
So if what can happen for the future is the record that's being left here and made accessible here, and the educational part is the distribution of it, then there's hope that legacy can continue and education can grow, and examination in the future, they'll start figuring out stuff that we all said we didn't know what we were doing. We were just working hard to do what we thought was right. They'll figure out what was happening. So that's
This is a very bright moment. Today, right now, at this moment, this is a very bright moment because there's a living history here. We're on the cusp of this all going away, right? So there's still those of us who lived through the experience, and I'd like to thank you for inviting me to do this because being representative of the youth movement is especially meaningful to me. I'm 62 and I'm just a kid with a crazy dream, but
I'm still an intern.
My Bluetooth hearing aid.
You'll always be an intern, Peter.
But I do, I do think that this is just a very special moment because we're on the cusp of history. We're living history, and there's past history. I forgot it. It's in my bag, but I've been carrying Tennyson's obituary around with me, and I've had it. I've had it on my desk for the last year since we started talking about doing this. And I had special opportunities, maybe half a dozen of them, to sit and speak with him over the years. And this was something that he and I talked about. He talked about this kind of thing with a lot of people. Who was going to write the book? Who was going to write the history of light, right? And if you brought the idea up, he'd say, you do it. And so he's, his spirit and all the craziness that was wrapped up in Tennyson is here. But I just had to have Margaret Loeb's obituary with me for the last year to just remind me of how important it was.
Well, that leads into a question I have for you all. Did any conversations over the course of the last 2 days bring up a specific memory about light that you had forgotten? Or something that had happened?
I'd like to get the record straight about something.
Oh, go for it. Let's do it. Here we go.
And Harold may disagree. But the Gary Winogrand show hung without mats and frames was my idea. And the reason was, and this will fit into what we've been talking about, talk about enabling. I always
Uh-huh.
felt my job was to present the artist's kind of attitude, vision, unique to them. So when Winogrand, who despised thinking of himself as an artist, he couldn't stand the art world, you get this box of prints, who the hell are we to mat and frame them and make them art? I said, let's just put them up. And as far as my memory serves me, that's what I did.
Harold?
Corrected.
It's corrected.
How many? 111. Thank you. I didn't hang them, I don't think. They look good. Yeah, it amazes me
Okay.
that this becomes historically
We're
significant. What?
Streaming this, it is recorded
Oh,
for
hey out there.
in perpetuity. Does everyone understand? Responsible party, right there.
And the other aspect about how
Yeah.
light always reinvested in itself, in the sense that it was continually trying to re-examine. When I curated the Salle show, when we hung the autobiography on the curved wall without glass, and Tennyson said, "Oh, it's like Gary Winogrand." And in his,
Yeah.
and who would have thought, right? His
Sure.
support of trying to do something else at Light, not something
Absolutely.
new, but something else, and bring it full circle.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
it was just like what they had done back with
Well,
Gary.
I'll share with you, and this is the director outing herself, but Becky's vision for the show, there's this, when you walk in the gallery, you see this beautiful photograph of that curved wall. And Bruce came in my office and said, "Annie, we're going to build a curved wall. We are going to recreate Light Gallery." No budget for that. I said, take a photograph, we can do that. But that was the intention, because that wall, I know I've talked to Peter about it, some other folks. That was a very interesting and important part of Light Gallery, and I think you told me it was just a pain to hang anything on it.
If I could,
You know,
For-
you can blame me for that. I drew that. I drew that round wall.
first of all, I think we all need to stop for a second and recognize somebody who's not here, and that's Victor Schrager. And Victor was the second director of Light Gallery, the smartest of any of us. He went to Harvard, you know. And he was the only guy I ever met who actually went to Harvard and didn't let you know that the first 3 seconds,
3 seconds
of
into it, yep.
sitting down with them. He's not here, but he was an integral part of why we are here. And filling Harold's shoes was a very, very difficult job. Victor did it more than admirably. And I worked very closely with him, and I was too worried to ever let my desk pile up with correspondence, and Victor's desk was like a landscape. I came in one Saturday morning, and it was clean. And when Victor came in promptly at 10, drinking his black coffee, I said, "What the hell did you do?" He said, "I put it in the round file." And I said, "You can't just throw that stuff out." And he said, "Well, if it's important, they'll get back to me."
Yep.
That's how smart he was. So I just want to just talk about the
Yeah.
curved wall for just a quick second. And that is, it was designed by I.M. Pei. It was your idea?
Yeah, it was
And, you know, the architect was referred to in the gallery as I am paid a lot. And as I recall, when the gallery opened, it had no carpet because the budget came up a little short. That's not the first time that's
Yeah.
happened. But anyway, hanging two-dimensional works of art on a curved wall was pretty challenging, and I think we all.
But it was another indicator of that moment, because 10 years later, a good deal of photography would never fit on a curved wall.
Yeah.
But photos were still small until about the mid-'80s.
Right.
Since we're sort of on the subject, what's wrong with me? Electronics don't like me. Since we're-
Again, opportunities.
Yeah. So since we're on the subject, just very briefly, if you were never at 724 Fifth Avenue, there was a brilliant aspect to the design of the gallery, which was when you got off of the elevator, there were two very thin, maybe 8 or 10 inch wide mirrors that were set into the sidewalls, and so that when you walked in, you had this like very strange sense that somebody was watching you. And it was about seeing, and you would get this peripheral vision reflection in your eye from the mirrors. And it was just this like tiny little brilliant effect that had no purpose other than to slow you down and stop you before you approach the artwork. And I can't tell you how many times I've thought about that in my gallery, because we get the drive-throughs all the time. The people who come in, walk around the perimeter of the gallery, and they're gone, And in this day and age of like instant information, nobody's got the wherewithal to stop and look. And that's what light was about. And it was exemplified in that little detail in the building out of that space.
Jack?
Let me just add one real quick thought.
Yeah,
Becky, I think this whole process has been amazing, and I would really encourage you to reach out to all of us who have any affiliation with light and ask us to write down or do it in front of a camera our 10 favorite anecdotes, because there's a really wonderful, rich, humorous, humanist texture that's getting lost in the concept of community. We're just a bunch of individuals, and we all have amazingly ridiculous stories to tell, but add something real about it. Like, what was Arnold Newman like? What was Harry like? Aaron. There's so many wonderful stories. So I think that we need to go further with this amazing foundation that you've established.
That's very true, because we would go and stay with we went and stayed with the artists. I mean, I went and stayed with Heineken and.
Wow. Okay, the symposium is now
know,
taking
Scratch that.
another
and
turn.
we scratched our initials in his door, and but we do have unbelievable. We had a lot of bumps too. I mean, and we had crazy things. The openings were really insane. I remember we would, and we entertained. We had punch and food and this and that. I remember Carol's matting room was this private little spot where she had all the mats, and she was very precise. She has got to be interviewed. And Victor had this big punch bowl, and as he's bringing the punch bowl out, it broke, and it spilled all over Carol's mats and the artwork. Do you remember that, Fern? Oh, God, that was tragic. Do you remember that this fancy IMP architect, he did not calculate the length of the strip lighting, and they couldn't fit it up the elevator. And for the opening, we had to run around with clip lights. And I think it was Neil Slavin's show. Yeah, we had a lot crazy, It's fun now and fun to think about because it's over. But at the time, and I remember Fern ran out because our floors were all dusty, and she goes, I know what to do. And you went and got coffee grounds, and we had to sweep the whole floor with the coffee grounds. Do you remember? Yeah. We were maniacs.
Well, the opening at 7:24 was tumultuous, to say the least.
Yeah.
Because nothing was quite what it was supposed to be, least of all the runs.
Yeah.
So, and to sort of follow up on what Larry was saying, I want to acknowledge Harold's program of the Voices of Photography, which did and has documented
Absolutely.
the history not only of photography, but including light. I remember one of my trips out here and leading into 6 hours of continual interviews with Harold and Skype back then
Yep.
or whatever, and no one else was doing it. So part of this comes also from that aspect. And I'd just like to talk about a little bit about the educational aspect, because that was part of the culture even when you worked, in the sense that I remember going to Aaron's with Robert Mann, and Aaron coming out of the shower completely naked and talking. And so eventually gets a towel around himself. And he says, oh, wait a minute, let's before we start talking about the show or whatever we were doing, he goes in the back and brings out this little print of his Moroccan facade. I said, it's amazing. I said, oh, that's beautiful. He goes, no, Jack, I saw your cliche verse. See this? And that was education.
Yeah.
Because Aaron was still teaching through photography to other photographers. There was not a hierarchy of knowledge at Light. We all shared it in a wonderful sense.
I think Susan's point of we actually did go spend time with the artists. And, you know, Frederick Sommer, you were put in a bed in the kitchen, and there were about 3,000 pounds of books on a bookshelf right above your bed with a slim wire and an eye hook connecting to the wall, which you just go to bed and like, please hold. But, you know, and those were the rich experiences that built, you know, the legacy of Light. And the same thing happened when you visited museum curators and museum directors. And there's one of the earliest supporters of, in the most serious collectors of photography, sitting in the third row from the back, Keith Davis. And Mr. Davis and his institution are the true winners in this thing, because they were paying attention and acting upon their interests earliest on, and Keith has built an extraordinary collection at the Nelson Atkins in Kansas City. And so, you know, all of us have been friends with Keith for decades. Jim Wood was the director of the St. Louis Art Museum, and as Susan said, they had no curator. So when I went with my box of pictures, you met with Jim Wood, who was insanely interested in photography. And eventually, one of the last things he did before he died, when he was director of the Getty Trust, was bring Irving Penn's part of his archive to the Getty. So it was based on the relationship that was built by us as traveling salesmen.
I know our audience really they want to get their questions out and broaden this conversation. I'll ask you, this is kind of a cliche question, but it's a good one. Is there anything you would tell your earlier self back in the days when you were at Light, based on what you know now?
Maybe. No, I would say believe in yourself. Trust your instincts. Don't second guess yourself. And that's when I have student groups, that's what I tell the students. If you have a good idea, do it. My only regrets in my career are the things I didn't do, that I talked myself out of.
I would take more pictures, and I would have bought more pictures. You know,
Or keep them, yeah.
I wanted to bring up an anecdote. Every Christmas time, Fern and Tennyson would let us buy a photograph at cost. And this might sound a little scary. At the time, I don't think I was making more than $7,000 a year when our rent was $1,500. And I spent $700 on a Frederick Sommer photograph. So, and I in a million years, I will never sell it, but I know where my archive is going.
Oh, that's...
Can I be the dealer for your archive? I'm into archives now. I learned that too at Light.
Yeah, I think the earlier self is to, and my coming later, is to try to tell yourself, you know, this world's going to explode. And this community, which was accessible by literally just talking to someone, and now filtered by assistants and director, and not being able to see whoever's working the gallery or the artist. Talk to as many people as you can, because that's where the source material is.
I think the only thing that I can think of is I would remind myself not to lose the things that I learned at Light. To show gratitude, to continue to show gratitude, to continue to respect the artists, to continue to remind yourself that we are nothing without the artists. And I feel that, like, you know, that the experience that I've had in running my own gallery scarily mimics a lot of what I've learned from Fern and from everybody else this weekend. But I would just remind myself that a lot of the things that I learned there are good and true and somewhat eternal.
I would say that the idea that sort of Harold shared with us in a leadership position, and it was very simple, was that our job as gallerists was to do as good a job on our side of the equation as the artists did on theirs.
Right.
So their standards became our standards.
Right.
So to take that idea and understand it and figure that that's Light, in part Light's legacy, and figure out a system now to share that legacy. And it's so easy with these multiple distribution systems to figure out how to get that down and get it down in a way that it can be shared in a global way. Information is power, and it can be shared globally in a very simple way. And if the center has a challenge, it might be that, is how to get this information out to the world.
Accessibility.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
in certain respects, Light kind of predicts the digital age because Light was a network. You know, we didn't talk about it at all in terms of like the financial structure of the gallery and how it survived. We discussed it a little bit with Charlie, but you know, Light was a wholesaler for a good part of its existence, so that, you know, we represented artists. And so if I know Susan Spiritus was here, I don't know if she's still there. She is. And we talked about it a little bit yesterday that you know, Susan Spiritus wanted a Harry Callahan, so she had to come to Light, and Light gave, looking back on it, very favorable terms to the dealers that worked with the gallery. But there were, you know, probably I don't know, a dozen other galleries around the United States and then later in Europe that came to Light for work. And so we kind of predicted, the existence of Light sort of predicted, you know, the digital age, the social media aspect of where we are today.
I think this would reinforce what Rick said. I bet if we held this symposium in Berlin about Light Gallery, we'd have as many people and as many interactions, and we'd have a whole nother graph. That extraordinary graph in the showroom is amazing. And I think there's a whole nother network of Rudy Kicken and Sue Spiritus and everybody. There was an amazing collaboration, cooperation, and sharing. So Light's impact is much broader than just the United States. Back then, right?
Okay, so what I'd like to do is remind our symposium participants to hold your question until a microphone has been passed. Please introduce yourself and state the question, because this is all being recorded and we are live streaming today.
Hi, I'm Irene Borger, and I think I worked at Light from 72 to 74. And I think I'm the only one who didn't go into photography or didn't stay in photography. And this is such a beautiful weekend. It's such a beautiful weekend. And I wrote down a few words because I want to say to you that the world of Light Gallery and Harold Jones went beyond the world of photography and the world of art. And there's a few things I want to bring up. One is ethics. Ethics that laces through everything, Fern. This is the opposite of the world of the craven, and to carry this forward at this moment is extraordinary, and that was always laced through. Another thing is, if you look, for those of you who weren't there, and you look at the pictures of the contact sheets, do you see how much fun we had? It's serious fun, and I run a program called the Herb Alpert Award in the Arts, and I've been giving 5 prizes of $75,000 a year to artists and choreographers and musicians, blah, 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 people who get MacArthurs. And what I think I learned at Light, I was talking to Harold about this morning, more than the wonderful pictures, is meeting people who understand what a practice is and who understand what commitment is. And that spreads out well beyond the chart, okay? I think that chart needs to expand and expand and expand. And bless that young man who put it together.
Right there.
Thank you.
Adam.
It's been such a
Adam.
joy.
To contextualize Irene a bit, she was so much part of the fabric Marvin, Irene, and Harold, they were Light Gallery. And so Irene, who just spoke, for all the people listening, she was a major, major part of what that gallery was about.
Mark Klett here. I just wanted to pick up on something that Larry was talking about earlier on that interests me. You've been very eloquent about what light did and the effects of it. But now we're in an era where we've got the internet, we've got Artsy, we've got art fairs, we've got galleries that are integrating art with photography. Can you reflect, I mean, realize that you're saying it's the next generation to sort of figure this out, but can you reflect with your experience, and where are we? What is the state of the gallery system now in photography that Light helped to create? Is there a role for brick and mortar gallery in photography anymore?
That's a great question.
I have the perfect answer, but I have to get it on my phone. just bear with me.
Peter?
Just in the interim, I think the, did you get it? Just quickly, and I'm like Bob Forth at that SPE meeting saying photography is dead. There were very few people making good pictures out there. I personally, having been a gallerist for 47 years, I think these standalone bricks and mortar photography galleries days are numbered. I apologize. I think what we need to do, just like taking the light information, making it part of what the world thinks about, not just what the photography world thinks about, is what our job is. I think the photography, and you brought it up and spoke very well about it, photography being seen at the Museum of Modern Art in the broadest context is what the future is about. Because photography was not a standalone entity. Surrealism could not have existed without the interchange that happened between the surrealists, including Man Ray. He was very much a part of it. The Bauhaus was based on, Mises' philosophy, but it was also Moholy's philosophy. So it's a global picture, and I think we have to allow photography to integrate into the larger context. And I think it's hard. I mean, I'm winding my gallery down and starting a new endeavor with a media company to tell the story of photography to a large audience.
Yeah. I have two things to say. The very first artist I represented after I left Light was a woman named Frances Murray, who happened to end up marrying Harold Jones. And Frances and I, for the last 2 days, have been talking about pop-ups, because I can't afford my rent anymore. But I truly love doing what I'm doing the way I'm doing it. So I have to change, I have to adjust, and I'm up for it. So Frances and I have been talking about, since my business is becoming more about the showroom than the exhibition room, maybe I don't need the exhibition room. I mean, half of Chelsea is vacant now. This real estate crisis creates great opportunities if you're willing to go and look for it. So I'm starting to consider, based on our conversation yesterday, maybe I don't need a gallery. Maybe I just need a destination where my clients can come and shop. But if I want to do a big show, I'll rent an empty gallery space for 3 weeks and be done with it. But to get back to Mark's question, this was going to be my closing remark, but I'm going to save that for later. A friend of mine is a pretty serious guy in the Broadway theater industry, and one of his passions was reviving American musicals. And after doing it for 20 years, he's retired from that aspect, but he's still producing. And this is what he wrote, or was interviewed. And I find it has a lot of resonance for myself. So when you hear American musical, think photography. We're in a moment where the American musical, and particularly the classic American musical, is being reconsidered in so many ways because of its gender politics, its racial politics, and all of its attitudes about life in America. I completely endorse the idea that the rethinking should be done, but I don't think I'm the best person to do it. And that's where I'm at.
Jack?
Also to Mark's question, one statistic sort of explains how the art market, and that includes the subset of the photo markets, has changed. I think it was 2 years ago that 85% of the exhibitions presented by the Guggenheim came from 5 galleries. So it means that the art market is changing. There's room for the mega galleries on the top, and perhaps the startups are on a shoestring, but this middle level gallery existence, making its budget every month, being able to represent people on an ongoing basis, promising shows, that model may not be functional.
Sustainable.
Yeah, I've been saying for years that I'm a dinosaur, you know, and I think when Mark was, you know, making comment about photography and art gallery, you know, photography galleries starting to show art or whatever, he shot a little glance at me. And I've lost, you know, a good number of my audience because I've started to show painting and sculpture and taxidermy and neon and works on paper and, you know, everything. But that really is who I was. I mean, I grew up in an art context, and all my career was, you know, you don't work in an auction house and not pay attention to contemporary art or antiquities, for that matter. So I'm gonna probably anger some people by saying this, but I think one of the reasons why the photography market developed the way that it did is because of Beaumont Newhall and because of the history of photography that he wrote, which was very, I think, misunderstood by a lot of people. I think what Newhall did was exactly what a good art historian should do, which is what I was saying before, filled in the gaps. There was a need for information and for knowledge, and he filled it in. And it was us who turned it into the Bible. Photography was never a segregated medium. It functioned, you know, in society and in culture in 1,000 different ways. And so I think what we're seeing now, what Peter's referring to, and is the fact that we've come of age with it. We understand that it's part of, you know, the whole fabric of image making. And so it's not just a standalone thing. The center will be here for a long time. I'm not so sure about like the medium-centric art fairs. In fact, over the last year with what's happened with APAD and Pari Photo is very indicative of how difficult it is to have that model survive. And it'll be very interesting to see what happens with, you know, Pari Photo New York in the spring.
So, I'm Andy Grunberg. I used to write obituaries for the New York Times of people that were still alive.
Have you done ours?
But nonetheless, I hate premature obituaries. So I just want to say, the king is dead, long live the king. And to admit my own feat of clay that soon after I started writing for the Times, in 1982, in the wake of several photography galleries closing, I wrote a major article that said the photography boom was over. So, however many years later, it seems like all of you on stage have had careers in photography. You know, Cindy Sherman's Untitled film stills had not yet sold for $3 million. Andreas Gursky print had not yet sold for $4 million. So before we bury photography as we know it, I think we're just like experiencing a turnover. And maybe it's like not bricks and mortar. Since we're in Tucson, maybe it'll become Adobe. I don't know, but I just think that these transitions that we've gone through, we've all experienced them, don't necessarily mean that like something irretrievable is going to be lost.
No, but
It's a very positive evolution. And Andy, thank you for your extraordinary and ongoing support of the medium, because your predecessors at the Times had a fairly uneven, sketchy record. And when Andy Grunberg wrote something about photography, it truly meant something, most importantly to the subject, and then almost as importantly to the fact that it brought hordes of people into the galleries that you were paying attention to. So we could really feel like we were doing something And Andy was very, very, very much a part of that effort when we were all working.
Okay. We could replace the carpet. You know, speaking of dead people, you know, we have lost a lot of people. We worked with living artists, and so many of them are gone, you know, and we remember them dearly. You know, we would go out to lunch with Paul Strand. I remember taking a whole bunch of his photographs down to 5th Street so he could sign them. He was in his underwear. You know, Beaumont Newholm was my teacher. We lost Harry, we lost Aaron. But the thing that bothers me the most is now, you know, people from time to time will ask me, you know, what did you do, you know, et cetera. I'll say, well, I represented photographers, Harry Callahan, Aaron Siskin, and they just look at me blank. And I'm heartbroken. So one of my hopes for this symposium and for the abilities of this great institution is that these people will be remembered and discussed and shown. You know, I see these, you know, I don't get these big color photographs. No, I don't get it. You know, I'm a Beaumont Newhall student and I'm a classic artist, but I don't get this big, colorful, empty looking work. I'm really sorry. No, you might be an exception, but I think you might know who I'm talking about, Toth. So in any case, that is one of my hopes.
Okay, I want to bring it down to
Your name,
something
please.
very, very specific. Ann Tucker.
Thank you.
I would like each of you to try to remember a picture that came into the gallery that disturbed you or haunted you or it took you years to understand. I mean, you've talked about the artist, but it's really about the pictures. And I just want to know what that picture was that you either eventually did own or wanted to own or keep returning to decades later.
I'm right on this. I'm right on this. Thank you, Ann. I've been waiting for somebody to ask me this question. Emmett Gowan's Rennie Boer and Avebury Stone. In 1980 or 81, he brought in a print that was extraordinary, in the truest sense of the word. In fact, it was so extraordinary that on the back of the mount, he wrote monoprint. We sold it very reluctantly to Jill Quasha. What's her brother's name? Alan Quasha. Jill got Alan to buy it. It sat in his closet for 5 or 6 years. I sweated over that picture. That picture literally, as you said, haunted me. I finally tracked it down when I had a little bit of money. Oh, the other thing was that in 1981 or whenever the print came in, it was $2,000. And most of Emmett's pictures back then, I think, were $750, yeah, something like that. And this one he marked at $2,000, and I believe Alan paid $2,000 for it. And I never forgot it. And a few years later, I approached Jill, and I said, you know, does your brother still have that picture? She said, yeah, it's like sitting in his closet. He hates it. And I bought it from her. And it was the most money I'd ever spent on a photograph up to that point, probably still is. And it is like one of my most prized images. I pull it out every now and then when I just want to feel like I need to leave this earth. Rennie Boer and Avebury Stone. It was the picture that Emmett made. He was traveling in England, photographing, and when he got news that she had passed away. And so Edith had him pack up and it's a multiple exposure. So he had taken a picture of this stone in Avebury and had neglected to mark the slide in the film holder, I think, that it was exposed. And he did a post-mortem of Rennie Boer in her coffin and created this image. And it is the most extraordinary print, and if anybody ever wants to see it, just come on by. I'll be happy to show it to you.
All right.
It's not for sale.
Jack.
For me, it was Frederick Summers' Amputated Foot, because it resonated within the history of art as something that was so compelling and so repulsive at the same time. And that flicking from reality to transformation aesthetically seemed to sum up what art could do.
Larry?
I still have the print. Well, I went to Light in '74, and around that time we did a Harry Callahan show. And Harry had taken a picture on a very quiet Sunday morning in Providence, Rhode Island, of an insurance company building with a real wide-angle camera square. So this building occupied this space, and there was one little man walking there by the building. And to this day, I'm still trying to make that picture. And I mean that seriously. But the picture spoke to me on so many levels. It reminded me of as a child, we went to the Metropolitan Museum, and in the basement was like a miniature Parthenon or one of those buildings. And the whole concept that you could take something so mammoth and miniaturize it, contain something with so much history, always blows my mind. And Harry in this picture captured this building in its entity, and yet he saw it with such visual force that it's all equally abstract. And it's just, to me, it's in a box that says "Do not sell," so when I'm dead, my kid won't go and sell the damn thing. You know, that's how much I love it.
It's a great question, Ann. Thanks for asking. For me, it is the photograph that I purchased with 10% of my salary. It's called Orminda by Frederick Sommer, and it's a woman. It's a print of a woman, very strong and sitting sideways, and it's on a piece of paper that has torn partially away, and there's a knot in the wood where her heart is, and it shows strength and fragility at the same time, occupying the same space. And I will actually never really be able to see that picture. I have it hanging about 4 feet in front of me where I sit and have my breakfast, and I look at it. It is a different picture every day. It gives me chills to even tell you this. Yeah. But I love that picture, and like Larry, it will never be, and like you all, I would never sell it. In fact, you know, bury me with it. I just think it's the most beautiful picture. Thank you.
Peter?
It is a great question, Ann. When I arrived at Light in 1973, I was trying to be Robert Frank, and absolutely got nowhere. But I was making small 11 by 14 inch pictures and I was using a Leica to make them. So when I walked into the back room of Light and saw Robert Heineken's 3 Cliché Very works, I went like, what the hell is this? They were large. They were probably about 4 feet square. They were comprised of multiple canvases screwed to a piece of plywood, made from negatives that he had bought in the back, from the back of camera magazines. You could buy exposed but undeveloped negatives and they were sold as "Develop in the Privacy of Your Own Darkroom," and they were soft-core pictures, soft-core porn pictures. And I always thought that dentists bought them because dentists had darkrooms in their offices. So they didn't have to take them home, and instead of developing x-rays, they could develop these negatives. So I don't think there was much of a market for this work, except Heineken saw this. It fit into his matrix of thinking. He made these extraordinary pictures. Each panel was a light-sensitive piece of canvas that was printed upon, exposed 1 or 2 times, assembled to tell a story, and then he drew upon it. So to me, it was the revelation that, yes, Robert Frank was Robert Frank, and I was never going to be anything close to Robert Frank, but the possibilities that photography held were just extraordinary and far-reaching.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, I just want to make a... I'm a Cavalier Ketchum, Van Dern Koch's first graduate student, and the other one is Harold Jones, you know. All I'd like to say is also I have a flip phone, so you may be very suspect about anything I have to say, you know. But I think an important thing is also, I know this is about Light, but before Light there was Harold. Before Light, there was Van Dern Koch. Before Light, there was Larry Miller, you know. And I think it's incredibly important to find out about Harold before Light and some of these people, you know. In other words, what were they like before they went there? Few people know that, for instance, that the trouble Harold and I had to go to when we were in graduate school to go eat in the bread line and be able to eat, sit with Brother Matthias, who was up for sainthood. And nobody understands what we had to do, what we had to kind of risk our lives, you know, to be able to do that. And I think that's an important thing about Harold and about a lot of people that people simply do not know. And I think it's important that, and if people have this information, also you're listening to the man that had an argument with Van Dern Koch in 1961 and won the argument, you know. In other words, I think information needs to be out about certain people like myself, or many people in this room, you know, to record these events, you know, to make sure they go. And how do you know how do you know who to record this with, or where do you go, or what do you do next, you know? So I think that's important. I know this is about Light, but these people were before Light, and what they did in their lives, I think, was important.
Christian Peterson from Minneapolis, where the weather is dramatically different, which I admit was part of the reason I came. I have two quick questions. First, do you know if any of the photographers represented by Light were in fact able to quit their teaching jobs and make a living on print sales? Because as you may have noticed last night in the film, two different opinions were expressed on that. And secondly, I'd like to hear more about LA Light. It's only briefly been mentioned. Why was it open? When did it run? And why did it shut down? I presume because of finances.
Well, I think, Fern, you addressed it a little bit just the other night.
Yes, well, LA Light is sort of a tender, delicate topic. Tennyson went through what he called his photo-imperialist days. He felt we needed representation on the West Coast because there was a market out there and there were photographers out there. Excuse my back, everybody. And he hired Renato Denise away from the National Endowment for the Arts to run the gallery. And the gallery was beyond beautiful. And it just didn't work out. First of all, we didn't have the money to support it through its gestation and its early period. We just ran out of money. And also, people came to New York to buy photographs. I'm afraid that while Renato tried to differentiate LA from New York Light, people who were interested in New York Light came to New York to buy their photographs. And so we couldn't afford it, and we closed it down, and that's what happened. It had a brief, it was like a nova running across the sky. And I ran into the people who took the space over from us. I think it is still intact, and it's still very beautiful. But we couldn't hack it, and it was a mistake to have done it in the first place.
Just as a quick follow-up to the concept of developing a gallery in Los Angeles, Fern is spot on with the assessment that people in Los Angeles would come to New York because the activity of buying art was fun. It was an educational experience where they could learn something through the act of their inquisition and hope to buy something. And at Pace and Pace McGill, we also opened up a gallery in Los Angeles and had to close it quickly for the same reason. We would go out and make appointments with the major collectors to come in and see things we had just shipped out to Los Angeles. And while we were in the air on our way out there, we'd get a message that the appointment was canceled. They were coming to New York the next week, and they'd like to see the material in New York. So it's a difficult endeavor still to operate multiple galleries in different locations.
Right back here.
So I'm Scott Davis. I have the dreaded, what do you call it, comment, not a question. Relevant to this weekend, I was sitting next to a dealer of mine, and I said, you know, when Light Gallery opened, I was 5 months old, just to posit this, and this is relevant. But I made the foolish decision to start a photography nonprofit. I say foolish because it's going strong today, and I'm responsible for that. But I have to say that being here this weekend and listening to all of you and being reminded of how lonely this work can be, of what we do, and that as we, those of us under 50, let's say, face all the concerns and ideas expressed about the future of photography, I'm so inspired and have so much gratitude for everything that's been shared and for all of you, because it's this reminder that when I was 5 months old and you were doing what you were doing, that the future's big and bold and unknown, and it's something to embrace, and I'm just grateful for everything that's been shared in the weekend to date. So that's my comment.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you. Are we?
Can
Last chance.
Can I answer my own question? I want to say something, and I just, this seems like a moment to say it before I'm unable to say it. I've been involved in photography for 49 years, and I'm choked up, but the four people who were essential to my whole career in photography are all in the same room at the same moment. So here it is, Cavalier Ketchum, the greatest teacher I ever had, who, among other things, said half the great photographers in the history of photography are still alive. Go visit them. Then he said he didn't think he could teach me more than he had. Basically, go to New Mexico. So because of Cav, I was able to get into the University of New Mexico and study with Beaumont, Van, and now I want to mention Tom Barrow, who is just an extraordinary teacher and remains a close friend. After about a year and a half at UNM, I felt kind of burnt out, and I went to Tom and said, I'm done. You got any ideas? And he said there might be a job opening at Light Gallery. And I had met Harold once because I brought Cavalier to Light Gallery a couple of years before. So Harold and I had a wonderful exchange of letters. I'm going to see if I can find them and give them to the center. And I was fortunate to be hired by Harold. Thank you. Thank you all. And the fourth person, which I only realized 2 days ago, was Marvin Heiferman, whose departure from Light created the opportunity for me to go to Light. So I say from the bottom of my heart, thank you all, and it's just fabulous to all be with you here today. Thanks.
We all did learn so much from each other. I just want to say that it's fantastic to be appreciated, for all that work we did. And I also want to point out, I think this is work we would have done for free. I don't know how we lived so well on. I don't know how we lived so well on so little, but man, you could not pay me anything to have not done that. It was beautiful. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank not only, yes, we have one more. Oh, yes.
Michael Hyatt here, in a means of paying tribute to Harold. For those of you who worked with him, what was it like when he made the announcement that he was moving off to Tucson? Was there a sense of dread? I doubt there was a sense of good riddance. Can you all talk about that when he left and how you attempted to fill his shoes?
we were, well, I was a combination of frightened, disappointed, pissed, and it was just Larry, Victor, and I. And that was it. But he had left us with everything we needed. But we knew that he was doing something because he follows his passion. And we were not going to deny someone's passion because we were fulfilling our own.
I had maybe just arrived a year or 14 months or so before you announced. So I was deeply disappointed because you were, you know, if I knew anything about Light, it was kind of you. And so it was a bit of an adjustment with Victor because of, I think he was younger than me, and he was younger, smarter, and beat me every time in backgammon. So that thanks to you, Harold.
Hi, I'm Harold. Hi. First, thank you, Fern. Thank you, Annie. If you want to, we keep talking about my vision. When we were in New York, I didn't know what the hell a vision was supposed to be. I had ideas and but if you want to know my vision, you're sitting in it. You're in it. And my friends are up there. And the staff here, and Annie. So I want to thank you. And it's evolving. If anything makes me feel good about this, is the new gallery. It's going to be interdisciplinary photography gallery. Now, where do you see that? Right? So let's give Annie a hand and her crew. And just a comment about my hair in the movie. Now, before I went in, okay, I at the time was performing science experiments with my hair. And I came to be ready to be filmed, and Emily, I have a picture of Emily fixing my hair because it's right, so I should, if they want to fix it, so when I went in to be filmed, I looked okay, which that was okay, right? That was great. So, but it should have a title and a credit. Should say Harold's Hair by Emily.
So we've come to the end of our panel discussion. And of course, we're going to transition into celebratory mode in a little while. But I want to thank all the panelists that participated this weekend, and especially you all today for sharing that and acknowledging that we really are in a transformational moment and one of change, and that that's okay, and that it's okay to have provocative conversations, and it's okay to discuss the future. That's what we want to do here. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have everybody leave the auditorium and enjoy some coffee and pastries and warm up. And then we're going to come back in, and we are going to have a wonderful program to honor somebody special with some great hair.
Great hair.
You're kidding. Oh, you'll be perfect. Oh, you'll be perfect.
Could transmitted a good sense of the joy.
I am too.
My mother would cry. You said Lily, she'd cry.
I'm a new mom. Yeah, you got your plans.
What's that? We're so excited.
You know what? We have
just
plans.
need a vehicle screen together. Because you would marry our daughter to Illinois, did a pop up on Tom's Christmas time. We'd be like,
we have pop-up space in East.
half of Chelsea's empty right now. A lot of it. Paces now, 25th Street.
Yeah.
From 10th to 11th. To this day, I'm wondering ridiculous. And even David Florence, the kid's like, yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. I said, I didn't know you were in your picture talking about either. It's just all this stuff. It's a great story, yeah. That's why I think we have to get a whole story. I really should. Come and spend like 2 hours with each of us. All this one room and share. And we feed off each other's thoughts. Here.